This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this StockBox interview.
Joining us this morning is Nick Tulloch, the CEO of Mendell Helium, after the company published an update on the operations in the helium projects and also an announcement of a Bitcoin Treasury policy. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Nick. How are you?
I'm very, very well, Mark. A bit tired. We put a lot of things together over the weekend, and so it's been a productive few days. But yeah, very, very well.
Good. Well, I mean, the Bitcoin Treasury is something that we're seeing a lot of interest around at the moment, and of course, the market seems to like your announcement. I think your share price is up nearly 150% on that. But we've seen a lot of interesting companies in investments in Bitcoin Treasury companies. So you've got a bit of a policy here. You've got four elements to it. Just talk us through generally what the policy is all about.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, as you know, and I think the last time you and I spoke, we were actually talking about Bitcoin. We've been looking at doing something in the cryptocurrency space since about March. And I think the first time we announced to the market was on the 1st of April. Now, we started at a different angle. We started at the idea of, can we find trapped gas assets, or can we use a waste methane product to carry out a Bitcoin mining function? That was where we began. There's a petulant side of me that says, actually, we were here first. We've had this idea for a while. What's happened is the market has developed a number of different appetites and theories around the Bitcoin Treasury policy, and that then became a very natural extension of our thinking. If we're mining Bitcoin, if we're going to mine Bitcoin, shouldn't we also have a Treasury policy? I mean, answer obviously yes. And if we have a Treasury policy, shouldn't we also have different aspects to that policy that doesn't just revolve around mining? So that's this morning's announcement. We have raised a little bit of money. We've raised £515,000. As you say, it's gone very well. The market seems to like what we're doing. And we've set out the beginning of how we're going to manage that Bitcoin Treasury policy. We've been in touch with and appointed a couple of specialists. I mean, okay, I've been looking at this for 3 months, but I'm not going to try and portray myself as a specialist in the area. We found some people who are very experienced, know what they're doing, and we'll be working with them to develop the plans that are outlined in this morning's announcement.
Okay. Good. So just let's go through the policy a bit and just sort of get a sense of how it could work. So do you still intend to look at a mining operation as well?
Yeah, we absolutely do. I mean, this whole theory started around our Rost well, which comes into production in the coming weeks. And Rost is an unusual gas mix. It's predominantly nitrogen, but also has an element of methane. Now, we're a helium business. When we process that helium, that methane was going to become a waste product. And it's the idea as well, what can we do with waste products? It's got a value. I mean, especially in Europe, methane is a very valuable product. How can we use it? It's too small a concentration to be sent down a pipeline. There just isn't really the processing facility nearby. So what can we do to use it on site? And that brought about the mining idea. Now that then spawned other thoughts. Well, if we're looking at this, it doesn't just have to be Rost. We're going to drill other wells around Rost. So can we do the same thing? Can we harness methane from different wells? And then the next stage is, well, actually, should we be looking at other assets? And there's a number of assets in onshore US that have trapped gas where, a bit like my Rost example, there's methane available, but the local market is either too lowly priced or just not available for methane to go to market. So how can we use that properly? And if you've got communication facilities on site, so broadly a broadband or a Wi-Fi connection, you can start a Bitcoin mining process. And one of the beauties about Rost, and I know you and I have done some videos in the past, we're right on a main road, 3-phase power, communication cables going backwards and forwards. And that's not going to be the case in every site we might look at in the US, but this is how the idea began anyway, which is, let's just be a bit creative and use a resource under the ground that isn't being properly used at the moment.
Indeed. So alongside that then, and what you've announced today, you say you're going to accumulate Bitcoin through spot markets, possibly alongside the mining operations as well, holding Bitcoin as a long-term treasury asset. So just on those 2 points then, do you plan to raise money to purely buy Bitcoin, which is what the Bitcoin treasury companies are doing? Do you plan to get into production and put all the profits into buying Bitcoin? How do you look to accumulate it?
It's a little bit of all of that. So it's obviously a lot easier, a lot faster to go into the market and buy Bitcoin than it is to mine Bitcoin. So a faster element of our new Treasury policy will be to go into the spot markets and buy Bitcoin, or potentially even in the future other cryptocurrencies. The mining angle is not going to change for us. We're going to continue to look at ideas. I mean, we've known each other long enough. I'm fairly conservative, and we're not just going to sort of rush out and build a server in the middle of a desert somewhere and kind of hope for the best. You will make sure that the economics stack up, and this is a worthwhile enterprise. But in the meantime, as I said, the natural extension, and some other companies have maybe paved the way for us. The natural extension of our policy was our mining policy was to create that treasury policy and to look to acquire Bitcoin and hold it as part of our reserves. Now, we have raised some money this morning, but more importantly, or equally importantly, we believe the Rost well, which will come into production very soon, has the potential to be extremely cash generative. And this is a well with 5.1% helium. It's been tested up to 2,900 MCF a day. I always say to investors, don't believe it's going to do that long term, but it just gives you an idea of the scale of this well. As we generate that cash, we need to have an idea. I mean, we can't just put the cash in a shoebox under the bed. I mean, that's the world has moved on, and the world has moved on to digital currencies. And it would be remiss of us not to have a plan to hold that cash in the short to long term. Short term, because we'll continue to develop our assets. We are an operating company. First and foremost, we are a helium production company. But also long term, we have an obligation to shareholders to maintain a strong balance sheet to support our operations. Yeah. And what the world is telling us is that digital currency is the preferred solution at the moment.
It seems to be, doesn't it? And if you can attract some of those investors in that space, we know a lot of capital is in there, which some have speculated is perhaps why the mining sector's seen a perhaps prolonged down cycle, because the capital is sort of got interests elsewhere. If you can marry those two together, that would be quite a good. Maybe that's the way we're going. Maybe we'll see more of these treasury companies. I don't know. I mean, I think it's quite a nice idea. We've got to make mining sexy again, and maybe this is one way to sort of do it. I didn't think of it, but I think it's a really interesting idea. Just on one of the points that was in the RNS, you say to also support M3 Helium's operations and specifically plans to expand. So will you look to leverage the Bitcoin in the Treasury somehow to help you with that?
I wouldn't rule anything out, and I noticed that there's an announcement from another company this morning that has a similar idea to that. That's probably a sort of step further in our thinking than we're at the moment. But what we do know is that any form of mining or oil and gas production process is capital intensive. We do know we're going to need to create capital. Now, conventionally, mining companies, oil and gas companies raise capital, but you can also, maybe unconventionally for UK small cap, produce that capital yourself, and that brings me back to the Rost production. We're not going to be generating $1,000 from Rost and spending $1,000 the next day on another well. There's going to be periods of time where we'll be accumulating cash and periods of time where we'll be deploying that cash. And so there needs to be a policy in place as to what are we going to do with that cash in the meantime. And I say conventionally companies will say, well, I'm going to hold the money in US dollars because that's where we spend the money, or I'll hold the dollars in sterling because that's where the company's headquartered. But what the world is telling us, and what I've been learning over the last few months, is there's a new solution. Hold it as a digital currency, actually far more efficient for cross-border work anyway, very convertible, very liquid, and easy to support the operations, and also receive cash from the operations, just as important, as we go forward in our development.
Okay, good. And just before we finish off, a bit of an update on the Rost well, just on the sort of the risk element, let's say. Of course, mining is inherently risky anyway. Bitcoin, we know that the price is volatile. Whether it's risky or not is up for debate, but it's volatile. What's your thinking with the hedging here, or the risk angle that you could be exposing yourself to now that you've got a treasury policy in Bitcoin?
Well, this is why we've retained people who are very familiar with this market. I understand helium, I understand currencies. I'm learning about Bitcoin, I'm learning about cryptocurrency, and it would have been the wrong thing to do to just read up on it on Wikipedia and sort of hope that we can go and set up an account and see what happens next. We're a responsible company, and we're going to do this with the benefit of professional advice, and that was included in this morning's announcement. But you're right, we have elements of the business that are inherently full of risk, geological risk for a start. We think we've managed that, and the results we're seeing from Rost, the visual results we're seeing, show us that there's something really quite exciting here. For us, Rost was all about dewatering. We have a working disposal well that's in the process of being permitted. That permit will be concluded in very early July. That's the point where we can turn on the switch and start the process of dewatering. But there's already gas shows at surface. You turn on the tap at the wellhead, there's gas coming out. Now, we're not analysing it, sniffing it, smelling it yet, but you can see that there's gas coming to surface. In the previous analysis, we had 5.1% helium. So you never know until you turn it on, but all the signs are telling us this is going to be very, very exciting. And as for Bitcoin, yes, it's volatile, but actually so many other currencies. And in a world where we have all sorts of drama going on in the Middle East over the weekend, a lot of Western currencies arguably are damaged by government policy, which is causing, let's just say, increased borrowing in Western economies. It's time, I think, for us to find a different solution. And if you look at the long-term graph of Bitcoin, this is not a flash in the pan. This is a currency that's been going for over 15 years now, and on a fairly steady upward trajectory. So I can't make predictions about the future, but what I can say is it is right and proper for us to have a Bitcoin treasury management policy alongside the other activities we do. As I say, we're first and foremost an operating company, but we need to have a sensible policy for management of our cash resources.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Nick. Good move, I think. I hope it all goes as well. You've got a bit of a window here where there's a lot of interest in this space, so you're jumping on that opportunity. Just finally, so you're only about 3 to 4 weeks away from cash flow and production at Rost.
Yes. So the position at Rost is we have the pump installed in Rost. So the well is ready to pump, and what I mean is pump water. So we remove the water, and that will enable the gas to flow. We have a disposal well 300 yards away called Broby that is working. Under Kansas regulations, that disposal well needs to be permitted, or in other words, you can't just pour water into the ground without the state's approval. All the signs are we're going to get that approval, but there is a waiting period for it to be concluded, and that waiting period is 30 days, which we're well into, by the way. So in early July, we'll be in a position to literally flip the switch. Okay. Between now and early July, we need to connect the two wells. You broadly connect a water pipe from Rost to Broby to deliver the water into the disposal well, and then we'll see what happens. Our expectation is as the water comes off the well, we will be able to produce an increasingly meaningful amount of gas. And if you lined up our team on site and said, what are your predictions? It's probably rather like predicting the FA Cup final. Everyone will give you a different answer as to what they think is going to happen, how quickly the dewatering process will take. But all of their answers are common. All the answers will say, this is going to be a really extraordinary well with a huge prospect of generating significant gas. So we'll see how we go with the dewatering. But first of all, we get started, and then we'll be in a position to start producing. Okay,
good, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Nick Tulloch, of course, the CEO of Mendell Helium. So hopefully we can catch up in the not too distant future when that switch is flipped.
Exactly. Well, I'll let you know. We'll do a live video perhaps when it all gets turned on.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Mark.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.